4 million. That is the number of confirmed coronavirus infections in our nation, and more than 145,000 Americans have died. Grim milestones, and they loom as heavy clouds over our politics. Inside the White House, the bleak reality has prompted President Trump to cancel his plans for a big arena speech in Jacksonville, Florida, when he accepts the Republican nomination next month. And as the president slides behind former Vice President Joe Biden in the polls, Republicans are tense and scrambling to address the breakdowns on public health and the economy. On the Hill, stark divisions remain and talks have stalled, but the clock keeps ticking. The $600 a week federal benefit, it expires in days. And earlier today, I spoke with Dr. Anthony Fauci, the government's top infectious disease expert, about the revival this week of presidential briefings on the pandemic. His takeaway: stay focused.
The president has gone out there and is saying things now that I think important, have to do with wearing masks, staying away from crowded places. So I think that they have been helpful now, and also they've been short and crisp, which I think is good when you're trying to get a message across.
Joining us tonight are some of the best reporters covering Washington. Weijia Jiang, White House correspondent for CBS News. Rachel Scott, White House correspondent for ABC News, is not yet with us. We're going to get that audio fixed, so stand by for Rachel. We're also joined by Peter Baker, Chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, and Jake Sherman, senior writer at Politico and co-author of Playbook. For all of us watching Washington Week, I appreciate your patience tonight as we deal with some technical difficulties and some audio delays. We're all dealing with this pandemic in the best way we can. But let's get to the reporting. Weijia Jiang, the Jacksonville convention, that speech was canceled, but the president continues to push to reopen schools. What's the story inside the White House?
You know, I think the president had to acknowledge that the optics, if that alone would not be acceptable if you were to go down to Florida, one of the hottest spots in the country right now, to have this massive event for his sake and for the sake of his reelection. At the same time, he wants things to get back to normal, and that's why he continues to push for schools. And the White House is arguing that these are two very different things, because with regard to students and schools, you're not talking about cramming thousands of people together at one place at one time. But certainly the question still remains, why is it safe for students to go back whenever there's still, admittedly from the White House itself and Dr. Deborah Birx, not enough data about how these kids transmit the virus. And, they've said from the very beginning, Bob, that this isn't just about the kids, it's about grandma and grandpa at home and what it could mean for them if they take it to them.
Peter, build on that. Why the shift now from the president on the convention on face coverings?
Look, this is a moment when, reality has come home to bite the president. He wanted for weeks to tell us that the coronavirus pandemic was behind us, in large part, that there were only embers left. This week, he admitted for the first time in a while that there are big fires. That's the phrase he used about Florida and some of the other states in the South and the West. It's been a desire of the president, of course, to move beyond this in order to try to get the economy going and try to get the country in a semblance of normalcy by the fall, when he's going to face Joe Biden in this election. But the virus isn't cooperating. And the numbers are undeniable by this point. 60,000 new cases a week, 60,000 new cases a day, which is twice the rate we were having back in March and April when we thought we were at the peak. 1,000 new deaths a day. That's still lower, thank goodness, than it was in that spring peak, but it's on the rise. And these hospitals are overwhelmed in some of these places. So I think that the reality of that has come back and it forced the president to acknowledge what he would just as soon have not if he didn't have to.
Peter, a quick follow-up. Who has pushed the president along on these issues inside the White House? Is there anyone playing that kind of key role?
Well, that's a great question. You know, in hindsight, I think a lot of them would tell you that they have given him advice about this, that he needs to take this more seriously. I don't have, the specific breakouts. I know on the terms of the briefings, there was some skepticism early on, for instance, by, Jared Kushner and Hope Hicks about whether to start them again. They thought briefings might be fine, but they shouldn't be at the White House because the president would want to come by. Maybe they should be done at the Health and Human Services Department. But then there were others who were telling the president, look, you've got to get back out in front of this, that the country is concerned about this. The poll numbers are terrible right now for the president on the virus. I looked at Gallup again today. Twice as many people think today that the virus is getting worse as felt that just a month and a half ago. 75% of Americans, are convinced that the virus will keep America shut down or partially shut down or disrupted at least until the end of the year and possibly into next year. So there's a great deal of fear and anxiety among the public. The president had to get out in front and address it.
Rachel, I'm so glad we figured out this connection. And you join us tonight from Troy, Alabama, the birthplace of civil rights icon John Lewis. The Georgia congressman died on July 17th, and a memorial service will be held there on Saturday. And we will discuss his life in our Extra. But back to Peter's point, Alabama officials reported this week more than 2,200 new cases on Thursday, a new daily record. And Peter talked about the reality of the facts here, of the virus. How is the spike in red states like Alabama affecting the administration's approach?
Right. Well, I think the reality is certainly setting in, and we heard that from the president that it's going to possibly get worse before it gets better. But there is still a large swath of this country and some of the president's supporters who think that the pandemic is a hoax, who do not believe that it's real, believe that it's manufactured for a political purpose, and that is for Democrats to try and defeat the president this fall. And I also think, as I'm talking to Republican sources, when it comes to the president kind of backing down on his convention plans, they were breathing a sigh of relief. The optics of the president, as we just said, going down to Florida and possibly having another headline like he did in Tulsa, where his own staff had tested positive, or Secret Service had tested positive, and then also not having a full arena, not having a packed house, right? The optics of that look bad for the president just months away ahead of the November election.
And Rachel, down there in Alabama, are people wearing face coverings in a red state?
I am seeing a lot of people wear face coverings down here in Alabama. That's something that was not always the case in other places that I traveled, notably Oklahoma, where wearing a face mask seemed to be a political issue in certain parts of Oklahoma, as I traveled there for the president's rally in Tulsa not too long ago. But down here, people seem to be taking this very seriously. They're trying to keep their distance and wear the appropriate facial coverings.
Jake, Weija, you want to jump in?
I do, because I just think it's important to point out that I've talked to sources, including some members of the task force, who say, that's great that in certain areas people are now wearing masks, but they are concerned that it's too late to put the toothpaste back in the tube, because the messaging was so jumbled on this before, and the president sent, a lot of signals that perhaps people should not take things like face covering so seriously. And so we are now 5 months into this pandemic, and people have already adopted their views and their behaviors. And even if the president comes out and changes his messaging and leans into the science, there is concern that it is too little too late.
That's a good point, Weija. When I was speaking to Dr. Fauci earlier today, I asked him, should there be a national mandate for face coverings? And he said he didn't lean into the idea at this point. He left it up to local officials. But Jake, take us onto Capitol Hill. This is a real issue. You're covering these players every day, writing playbook at 4 a.m. in the morning. But this is about whether people are going to get $600 continued in unemployment benefits. This matters for them, whether this deal happens or not. Why did it break down, and will they come together?
Well, why did it break down? It's really interesting, Bob, because Senate Republicans right now are not even negotiating with Democrats. To put this in context, Senate Republicans can't agree with themselves on what should happen next, on what they should propose. They want to put out a marker for their negotiations. They have failed to do so. Mark Meadows and Stephen Mnuchin have been on Capitol Hill all week, meeting with senators, meeting with Senate Republicans. They met with the Speaker of the House and Chuck Schumer. They can't get it together. First of all, there's no way the currently enhanced unemployment unemployment benefits will continue as constructed. People are not going to get $600. There's other discussions about maybe 70% of lost wages. There's other formulas that are under consideration, but the current formula, which expires 1 week from today, is done. Now, the larger question will be whether Senate Republicans can get a deal once they coalesce around something with Nancy Pelosi. And there was an anecdote from a meeting with Mark Meadows and Stephen Mnuchin, where Mark Meadows and Mnuchin said, we're going to give you $105 billion for schools, not the 100 you asked for. We're going to give you even more. And Nancy Pelosi turned to him and said, we need $400 billion, not 100. So that kind of illustrates the gap between the two sides at this point as they try to cobble this deal together in the next 2-3 weeks before the August recess, which is going to be delayed this year, just like everything else. And yes, this has real world impacts. And at this point, I would be pretty bearish on quick resolution to a coronavirus stimulus package.
But Jake, just quickly, what's holding the Republicans back? What do they want here? Is it liability insurance for businesses? Why are they holding back on aid for schools and states?
Well, like everything else, there's some Republicans who want to spend more money. Many Republicans want to spend, $1 trillion. There's some Republicans that believe they only need $200-300 billion. They believe the economy has healed enough that they don't need a big package. There are skeptics about state and local money. Some just want to give flexibility for money that they already have. So there's just a huge, huge gap between the Republicans within the Senate Republican Conference. Liability reform and a liability overhaul, I should say, is Mitch McConnell's top priority. He has said no bill will pass without it. So that is something that is going to be very critical to see how Congress rewrites these laws that would prevent people from suing if they get coronavirus when they go back to work.